Thank you, Michael, for coming. But before we start talking about Stay DC, could you explain your organization that you are an organizer for?
Absolutely. So cancel the rents, canceltherents.org, at cancel the rents on Twitter and Instagram, or facebook.com/cancel the rents. We're a national organization that was created right at the start of the pandemic when we saw the federal government was not going, we knew the federal government was not going to do enough to keep people housed, to keep people in their homes. And so we started taking immediate action to try to mass mobilize people, doing car caravans and things like that, to really demand that the federal government instate something to keep people housed. And with the eviction moratorium that was keeping people housed was great, but has since expired. And so we're now mobilizing to get it reinstated. And then locally in DC, we're really fighting to continue to fund Stay DC and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, because we see housing is a human right, and that the eviction process is an inherently violent process. And it's particularly cruel and inhumane to kick people out of their homes in the middle of a pandemic. So we see this as like an economic justice issue, where if the pandemic puts people out of work, they can't pay their rent, they fall behind on rent, and they can face eviction and face homelessness if they don't have a place to go after an eviction. So it's an incredibly violent and cruel and inhumane process. And then we also see it as a racial justice issue as well, right? Black people in DC are almost the majority of renters. 60% of Black people rent homes, and 33% right now of Black people in DC are behind on rent, or 33% of Black households are behind on rent, compared to 0.6% of white DC residents. So it's a huge racial justice issue that we see as well, where letting Stay DC run out of money, ending the eviction moratorium, is an attack on the poor, working, and oppressed people. And in DC, it's a racist attack as well.
On October on Sunday, you held a rally in front of DC's Capitol, we like to call it the Capitol, John A. Wilson Building. What was the purpose of that rally?
Yeah, so Stay DC has been a federally funded program in DC to keep people housed by paying their back rent and paying 3 months of rent for them if they were facing eviction, which was a really great program. It was kind of intended to keep people to last through the entirety of the pandemic, but we're not out of the pandemic. It ran out of money, and it needs more money to keep people housed. But it's also an incredibly long process. It requires tons of documents, and so we need it to not only be fully funded and expanded and extended, but it also needs to be a streamlined process so that people don't get lost in these documents and get lost in all of this application. It can take hours to complete, and if you're facing eviction, you may not have hours. If you're a poor, working, and oppressed person, you may not have the hours to sit on a Saturday night and fill out this document. And so we want to streamline the process to keep people to speed it up and keep people housed. And also with Stay DC, we also want to speed up the response by the DC government. They're taking months to provide them the funds that they need to keep people, to pay off their rent and to pay forward on their rent. And when you're facing eviction, you don't have months.
And just want to know for our viewers that October the 27th at 7 p.m. Was the deadline that officially Stay DC died. Mike, what can the Bowser administration and or the city council do in terms of Stay DC?
Yeah, so the federal government also plays into this, right? So okay. The city council is putting forward a resolution. I believe it's 10 out of 13 council members have co-sponsored or supported in some way. So that's a majority, calling on Mayor Muriel Bowser to tap into contingency funds in DC and unallocated funds for the 2022 year, because we have the money in DC to keep people housed. And then there's also a national level. They're also calling on the federal treasury to tap in, and it's got the money to keep people housed. We just added $10 billion more to the military budget. That's already inflated as it is with $700 billion. So we've got the money there. We don't need to make more bullets and bombs to kill people across the country to fund the 800 military bases. We have money that we can tap into to keep people housed today, because we're still in the middle of a crisis. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. We need to keep people housed today.
What can the average DC resident do who may not be dealing with this issue but is concerned about this issue? What can they do in order to move this process forward?
That's a great question. I would say, on one hand, calling your council members and your representatives to demand that they sponsor the bill and to vote on the bill or on this resolution, and also to call out Mayor Muriel Bowser. But then, on the other hand, joining Cancel the Rents and getting involved with Cancel the Rents, because in the past, it hasn't been the ruling class, it hasn't been the elected people who do these things, who take drastic measures to keep people housed during crises. They don't do it out of the kindness of their heart. They do it in response to the mass mobilization of people in the streets. So we can look back at the Great Depression, where millions of people were in danger of eviction and were losing their jobs. And it was a major crisis, one of the most major crises that this country has ever seen. And people showed up en masse. Not hundreds of thousands, not millions, but tens of millions of people were in the streets. And they were demanding these things. And in some states, there were eviction moratoriums that lasted for years. And we've done it in the past. And so we have the ability to do it again, but we can only hold politicians and hold the elected representatives accountable when we are in the streets and demanding these things. We can't hope that they'll do these things, because if we don't, they will serve the interests of the big landlords, the ruling class, the capitalist class. And so it's really on us to get into the streets, get involved in organizations like Cancel the Rents and other rent cancellation organizations and coalitions across the country. Cancel the Rents is national, and so there should be a Cancel the Rents movement and kind of branch or chapter, as you will, in your area. And so in the DC area with Cancel the Rents, we're mobilizing on two fronts, right? Because we're mobilizing locally with Stay DC to keep people housed right now today in DC, but also DC is the nation's capital. And so we have a two-pronged fight. It's a particularly unique and important fight to keep people housed across the country. So anybody who is facing eviction or is in danger of losing their home, losing their apartment in New York, in LA, that's our struggle too here in DC. So we're mobilizing and moving people and organizing people on a grand scale is our goal in DC to fight for people across the country.
You know, the interesting thing about covering this story and generally this topic is that surprisingly, a lot of people just don't know about the resources that are available to them. And then when it comes to the time that they're almost evicted, that's when they find out. I realize Cancel the Rents is an advocacy organization, but what role, if any, do you play in helping people try to stay in their homes?
Yeah, so some of the stuff that we've done in the past has been sitting down next to people to fill out their Stay DC application. And that's how I can speak personally to the Stay DC application as something that is incredibly difficult to fill out, because I've sat down next to people and spent 3 hours in one evening working on one application with someone. And so we're connected to some tenant unions, and tenant unions are really great because they're organizing the people in their community, in their apartment complex or their neighborhood to work together. And so tenant unions, to shout out an example, like the Woodner Tenant Union has been really great, getting people showing up and letting them know about Stay DC, because like you said, so many people don't know about it. And the reason for that is because there is insufficient work done by the federal and the local government to let people know that there is so much money that is available for them to keep them housed. But if they don't know, and then as you said, they won't fill it out. And so we are doing what the government is refusing to do and is not doing, which is helping people fill out their applications and letting them know about the applications and spreading the word through that as well.
Thank you for appearing on our show today. And I wish you good luck as you proceed to do what you're doing.
Thank you so much, James. It was a pleasure.